Oh, bonjour, Mr. Tonka Disneykas, Michikasto Dim, Neo Shingaving, Dochabag, Daily Sonata Aga, Nishnabe Queen Down, Shaganash Moswin, Ms. Quincy. I want to welcome my traditional and cultural family here, and we're going to talk about cultural knowledge. And I want to say, Miigwach and Yawagoa for you coming and sitting and sharing your knowledge. And the intent is to express how you feel about knowledge and how are we going to share that with the rest of the world. And I have a great deal of respect for these women and this man that comes and sits here at this table. So we'll go around the table so you can introduce yourself and say where you're from and we'll pass this feather. No? Okay.
You got a rock? Show? Okay. Yeah, that's out. Bonjour, Ani. Wawaskana and Dishnakas, Ajdak them, Dishkunzi being Vendagos, Anishinaabe Kwayandao. Just here, I'm from Chippewas of the Thames. My Shaganashi knows when my English name is Betsy Kijigo, and my Anishinaabe knows when is Wawaskana, and I'm from the Crane clan. I'm really happy to be here today to be able to share with my friends here and what it is we have to share and talk about the knowledge of our people from this inherently that are from this land and the knowledge that that the people carry. And so just that simple introduction and pass it on.
Okay. Good morning. Sego Gachichuaks ni gats Gwali Waks Grewage Denon Ganyanka Gani. So my Mohawk name is Gachichuaks. It means the making of medicine from the flowers of plants. And my clan is Ogwali and Mohawk. It means bear. And my people are the people of the Flint. So the British called us the Mohawks, but we call ourselves the people of the Flint. They were Ganyanka people. And my community is Six Nations of the Grand River. So I come from those ones that lived there or moved there from traditional territories in the United States. So we've only been there since 1784. But that's our current home because of trade and wars and this kind of thing that it happens that we're there now. So we're surrounded by Ojibwe. But that's okay. That's okay. That's okay.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Sisazik Tisnakas, Mjikad Dodom Kachanong Nunjum. My name is Cecil Isaac. I am from Walpole Island. I am Turtle Clan. And this road, this journey, I started on over 30 years ago. And my dad's birthday today, he's 88. And it's because of him and his journey that he was able to teach us, and he is a product of residential school. He was able to maintain a lot of his identity and a lot of his language that he brings out to our family. So I say miigwech for the invitation here. Any day we can get together is a good day. Yeah. Miigwech.
Abajo, Bishkote, Makasin, Clan, Disnakan, Mondo, Dem, Gajanan Dunjaba, Hodwada Mioda, Nishnabi Clan Dow, I'm not sure what I got myself into, so. Anytime I can get together with individuals, I think it's a wonderful day. My Anishinaabe means fire mockins and woman. And I'm from the Moon Clan, and I honor both my mother and my father. My father's Loon and my mother's Crane. And I live on Walpole Island, but it's Ketchikan territory. And I guess I've been doing a lot of thinking about where I come from and where I'm going. My life has been very interesting, and as all of you probably have had a similar experience. And looking at the imbalance that was created with contact and all the ensuing things that have happened. And so I think this meeting is timely and it's very important because there are people, a lot of our people don't even know the difference between before contact and after. And that's really, really important for future generations. So that's just what I like to say. Oh my, Shagnashi knows when his Mernakik knows when.
Miigwetchiyawa for each and every one of you for being here. The intent and why I ask you to come to gather is, number one is because I have great love for each and every one of you and a great deal of respect for the work that you do out there for the people. And we want to talk about what is Indigenous knowledge? What is cultural knowledge? What does that mean to us? Because we all know it's just, and I'm really happy that Myrna kind of opened the doorway to that. Before contact, we had all of this. We had our ways of being in the world. We had our governance, our ceremonies, our medicines, our balance of male and females as we walk through the world. The children are at the center of all of creation, and then the women and then the men. And we've lost that. And the intent is we need to come back and start to feed that understanding about where we have come from and those teachings and those ceremonies that brought each and every one of us here and how we are able to maintain or to get back to our original way of being in the world. And so that is why I had asked you to come and to share that. Because it is up to us as the original people of North America to wake up all of creation. That prophecy that said those three nations in man are going to come and ask us, who are we? How do we heal ourselves? What do we do? How are we in the world? How do we govern ourselves? All of those things, and it is time. This is our time and our place is now in creation. That we are the leadership, we are the Okichidar, the Okichidal Kwes that are moving forward to create that pathway. And it's like what Myrna said, for the next generations that come behind us, because they're asking. And it is up to us as aunties and uncles and grandmas and grandpas to continue to plant that seed. But all nations are asking, who are we? And I think it's time. We are paving that pathway. So with that thought and with that understanding, we'll go around the room and each and every one of you share what it is that you need to around, what we need to share, because it's going to be the next generation that is going to be listening to this, and we want to plant that seed for all people. Pretty much,
We're just going to start anywhere and just go back and forth, just have dialogue.
Yep.
No sequence or... No? Okay. All right. I don't know. I think it's like, I'll start it. Just like how Myrna talked about, like, a lot of our people, because of the disruption, the residential school that Cecil talked about, is that we've lost a lot of understanding about who we are as Anishinaabe people, and I think we lost a lot, but yet we know inherently what is running through our veins, the blood of our ancestors, and those thoughts and that genetic memory we carry with us. And I think that's part of the land that we're connected to, is that it tells us, there's something that tells us that we are Anishinaabe, we are Hongwe, we are, Anishinaabe, Kwe, Ninwak. Like, we know that inherently. It's not something that, I guess it's a message from our ancestors, our Mashomas, our Nokomis, the ones that knew, what their responsibilities were right from cradle right to grave, right? Because that's how we were brought up in this our clan system and our governance of ourselves, like a gatherer hunter society. We knew that this person would be raised up as the medicine people This person would be raised up as a gema. This person would be raised up as a storyteller. They would have those responsibilities told to them right from cradle to grave, and they knew inherently what they were supposed to do. So when we had that disruption where our mothers, our nurturers, our first teachers, lost that part of that relationship, and we have this gap, a generation where they're walking with, I don't know if you could say like binders on, kind of sort of thing, because really we're not stopping to look around to see what is all around us now. What is our responsibilities as Anishinaabe or Hongwe people, Lenape people? Because our grandmothers and our grandfathers were afraid to tell us about what our language was. Well, that was part of my experience anyway, my life experience, is that my grandmother told me, well, it wasn't important to teach you that because I didn't want you to go through what I went through when I was a child. Because if they'll treat you different because you're brown skin and because you speak a different language. I don't want you to be hurt like that. But as time went on, and my grandmother now, she's like, she remembers how her grandmother would take her to the bush and get, on a medicine walk, and she said, my grandmother, I can remember her speaking Anishinaabe only. Anishinaabe Etta. She would speak to her and talk about the medicines and show her, right? But then she says that the thing is that she doesn't remember that way when the sound, right? She remembers the sound, but it won't come out for her. And I feel like that's part of us as a people. Like, this is where we're at, and this generation now is like, we have it, but we're afraid to move on it because the generation that was there before, I think about, oh my God, my grandmother had to go through that experience, that awful experience of generational, like, and my grandfather had to go to war, like, to actually kill people and to be, in that kind of generation, like, and I think about us in this, it's like, what are we doing for our people? We're trying to pick up the pieces, they say, like what Liz mentioned, the prophecies, like, to pick up the pieces that were left along the trail. And that our elders will wake up and they'll speak again about what it is we were as a people in that hunter-gatherer society. It's like, okay, well, if this generation, and if we don't speak up and we don't, say what it is, our truth is, then I don't know if I've done a service to my grandmothers and my grandfathers, because of what they did. The reason why I'm here is because of them, because they survived this multi-generational trauma that's happening. We've survived the war, they've survived residential school, and here I sit, the grandchild, the benefactor, the whatever you want to call it, because of, their determination. I can't remember how you'd say that in Anishinaabe, when on Shinken, Gawin, Gegwa on Shinken, that's like, don't give up, be determined. And so I think about that, and I try to be the best, try to be the best human being you can be, but also I'm wondering, or that's what I ask, I guess, is, am I doing the best that I actually can for my, in my grandmother's eyes, in my grandfather's eyes? Am I doing the best that I can? And will my grandchildren benefit like myself? Will they benefit from what it is I'm doing today? And I think it has to do, with the language that I'm speaking now is not my language. I wasn't born into Anishinaabe, and that's what makes me really, feels like it just wounds my soul. When I even say it, I can feel that, It's like, that's the one thing that I wish that I'm constantly chasing after that. I'm constantly trying to hear that wave and those sounds because of the history and the stories that I was told growing up. Like my neighbor, and she was my godmother, and my grandmother that was the last fluent speaker in our family. It's like, okay, you know, those thoughts about the language comes from the land. The voice of the language is in the land. That's what I would always see on my godmother's wall when I would walk in her house. She would say, "Binigin mo na ben wisnin," you know. It was always welcoming. Come in, sit down, have something to eat. You know, it was always welcoming. But she wouldn't hesitate to give you a little bit of trouble too if you were being bad. You know. And that thing is that when I walked in there, is that is what I've seen all the time. The voice of the languages in the land. And I think that's very, very powerful because it talks about our creation story. It talks about our relationship to the land. It talks about our relationship to our mother. And it talks about that hunter-gatherer society. It talks about the clan system. All those things, there's so many different levels to that, just that one statement, right? And I think if we come back to teaching our kids about the land and those relationships that we had, then, you know, I think we are doing something that our grandmothers and grandfathers would want us to do. And I think that's, I don't want to, I'll just leave it at that right there and let someone else do.
Oh, Rich.
So when I listen to you, Betsy,
Yeah.
one of the things that that comes to my mind when I'm thinking about this question of Indigenous knowledge is, and it's a plural. Usually they say it's an S, because the knowledge can exist on two levels, right? But I hear you really strongly in your message that the need to transfer, to pass down Indigenous knowledge isn't really important, and it's part of sustaining us as a people, right? As a uniqueness in terms of the origins that we come from as the first peoples of this land. And so Indigenous knowledge for me is on two levels. There's the knowledge that's related to ceremony, languages, and the things that you're talking about. There's that kind of knowledge. The speeches that go with those ceremonies and the certain practices and the way that rituals are done or not done, there's that kind of knowledge. And then for me, there's another level of knowledge which basically falls into the area of what I call understanding, or a philosophy, which is kind of the reason for why we do those ceremonies and why the language being connected to the land is so important, because it gives you a deeper meaning, a greater understanding to the ceremonies, which according to the way I understand it, do change and can change over time. And so even as coming from the community that I come from at Ashwegan, which is the Six Nations of the Grand River, like traditionally they called us the people who lived in those long bark houses. But we don't live in those long bark houses anymore, but it doesn't mean that we disappeared as Native people. It just means that we've kept, I think we've kept an understanding, we've kept a philosophy, we've kept a system of beliefs, values, and attitudes that make us unique and distinguish us from other like mainstream peoples or immigrant populations, or what they call settler populations nowadays, I think is the politically correct word.
Yeah.
And so for me, Indigenous knowledge incorporates it includes all of those levels, right? From the language to the ceremonies to the practices to the protocols to the understanding to the philosophies that go along, which give us the reasons for why we do what we do. And it's at that level of philosophy where I do my work. It's at that level of the philosophy because they connect. It's what connects us across the board, whether I'm Mohawk, you're Ojibwe, or whether you're Cree or Lenni Lenape people. It doesn't matter in terms of the label of the area and the people that we belong to, because if you look deeper, there's a philosophy that we share, a common philosophy that says, you know, we're the people that communicate and connect very strongly and deeply to the creator of all of this life. So that we all have in common, regardless of whatever background we come from. And even though they put knowledge as plural with an S on the end, I think that's just to distinguish the different kinds of knowledges that are held by the different tribal groupings, right? And a little bit different language and a little bit different, you know, how they practice. But if I'm doing, you know, it's heavy on my mind right now because there's a lot of people passing on into the spirit world and transitioning. But I know that if we do a dead feast, the reason why we put through the feast for the dead is similar to the reason why other tribal people would be putting through a feast for the dead. And the acknowledgement of that transition and the acknowledgement of the ancestors who are on that other side, right? Who are receiving our loved one in the case of loss of someone. But also we understand that it's a spiritual transition, so they will be able to find their way back, and you pick up that life walk and that earth walk, and then you move forward once again. And so each generation that goes and then comes back, I think what I'm seeing in my work is a lot of return of spirits who are just little kids, but they're really, really bright. They're really, really aware. They know things which can only be described as the return of our ancestors, and the return of our ancestors that are coming back through, and we see them as our grandchildren, or we see them as our relatives, right? Or your cousins' children and nieces and nephews. You know, they're coming back, knowing things that I believe that they had lived here before as our ancestors, and now they're returning and they're bringing back with them the best of the belief systems and the knowledge and the practices, and they'll probably create something new for us as well, so that we can continue to sustain ourselves with unique beliefs, values, and attitudes that will carry us into the future. So that's kind of how I see it, as a ever evolving or ever growing tree of peace, we call it in Grand River and Six Nations. We have a wampum belt that records the history of and the philosophy of ever growing people, right? And so and we're not alone. We're being helped by lots of ancestor spirits, like I said, coming back. But there's also those spirits that choose to remain in spirit world that are guiding our people through ceremonies, if we only ask, but we have to go out there and we have to ask. We have to ask for the things that we need to know. And so for that, I can be excited, because we still have fasting traditions, we still have sweat lodge traditions, we still have ways that we can do ceremony, pipe ceremonies and things. Lots of ceremonies, you know, in your culture, as you know, right? Those things that I just mentioned, and even in my own, where we can sit and meditate and pray, and we can ask, right, for those teachings to come back to us. And I think that's what we have to teach our kids. We have to teach the young people. And what's really interesting, we have to teach them how to ask, but we have to teach them how to listen too, They have to listen to the Spirit, so they're not always aware that the way that you listen to the Spirit is by opening your heart, And that you have to open to the heart, and you have to listen, because it's different from Western education that actually privileges and tells us that we have to develop our minds, right? And we come from the opposite, that's saying we have to develop our hearts. So Indigenous knowledge that is heart-based, heart-centered knowledge is very different from the Western mainstream knowledges, which are coming from the development of, I know things, I know facts, I know history, I know, so I know things, right? But it's kind of a separate disconnect from the heart if you're just going to go and privilege and develop the mind and develop your ability to read and write without having to develop the opposite, the complementary side of us, which is our heart-based relationships and the focus, which I think is the center and the heart and soul of Indigenous knowledge is for our people. So that's kind of how I see it. These are the things I think about, right? And maybe it's because I think that way because I'm Western educated, and I had to make a journey back to unlearn, right? To unlearn what I learned in mainstream institutions, and it was a long, hard journey for me to come back to that heart-centered place, that spirit-centered place, to understand how spiritual matters, right? How they operate in our culture, and how people get along, and how you draw that spirit knowledge through the heart, and then you pass that on to your kids in your previous generation. So I think this is the time for Indigenous knowledge holders or knowledge carriers, people who work in this way, to really educate mainstream people, because it's not that they're bad people, it's just that they came out of a different tradition, a different understanding for how to educate and what education means to them in terms of what they pass on. But I think they could benefit from our heart-based knowledge, our spirit-centered focus, that we might enrich the Western education and enrich the mainstream peoples. And I think that's why we're having this meeting today at Fanshawe College, because it's part of what we have to participate. I think we have to participate. Maybe it's a choice to participate, but I think if we really care about our people and we really care about how we move through the world, that we might enrich the lives of other people in these institutions besides our own students that come here, Native students that are here, that it's perhaps time now to enrich everyone, right? Including our own. I think that's the time we're living in, but that's kind of what I think about. Those are the things I think about and keep me awake at night. But I'll pass the ball over to Cecil or Myrna for one of the, if you want to bounce off anything that I said there.
Well, I find what you said very interesting because I agree with what you're saying. I'm learning more, and I guess that to me is the big key to this. It isn't how much I don't know, it's how much I know now and how much more I knew way back when, because that's the key, because we're always learning. Once we finish learning and we carry out our responsibilities the way the Creator intended us to do, then that's time for us to leave this creation, And it isn't to feel bad that, this person is leaving or that person is leaving. They've done what they were supposed to do here on this earth plane. So I think with that kind of understanding, it's very different, and I agree with you, it's very different than mainstream. And I'm finding that it's the young ones that are the teachers now. It's the young ones, as long as we pay attention to what they're saying and what they're doing. Last night I had full moon ceremony, and it was, I have women of all ages, and I'm talking about little Quesants coming all the way up. And so it's very important. This is also for us the healing time. This is the healing time during the winter. And it's interesting, you got the bear there, that we made our bear bundles for that healing. So all of those things are resurfacing again. We're being shown those, and it's an individual journey, because we're a collective in some ways, but individually we have things and we have gifts that we are to bring forward. And it's just like, I remind people, when you sat with the Creator, you were told what you were going to do. You were told everything about your life. So I'm coming to more understand that, because I agree with what you're saying. When I'm discovering more about who my grandparents were and where I came from, and that's critical, because if you know where you've come from, you know kind of where you're going. And yes, residential school had an impact, but the thing is, from my point of view, is that we already knew it was going to happen. Our ancestors knew what was going to happen. So all of those things they're left by the road, by the side of the road, they're waiting for those ones who are going to come along and wake that up and bring it to the rest of the people. And I see just so many beautiful, beautiful, beautiful children and adults too that are finally waking up. It's like think about that sleeping giant that's up in Lake Superior. It's waking up and it's letting itself, people around know what is going on. And if you're ready, because it's an individual journey from my perspective, you have to be ready to receive what you're given and then be able to process it or put people in your life that can help you process. Because it's so critical and it's so important. I had one little girl last night, she's 6, and when I do things I say, who is going to pray for the water? She says, I will. Okay. All right, her auntie went and helped her. Because she's learning it. She's learning about that water and that relationship with the water as female life. And that's critical. That's critical. Just as the men that come to take care of the fire or the little boys that come, they're learning about men's role and responsibility. So all of those things are extremely important to all of us. Because there's that time, as you said, that we have to unlearn all of those things we thought were fact and thought were true and relearn what we really need to learn so that we too can pass it on to the next generation. And also take care of our ancestors because they're waiting for us to do that too. As we did last night, we had a feast and the ladies now know that, I think our relatives are very hungry. So we take care of them. Because they're our helpers. They're the ones that can help us move to the next place that we need to go, individually and collectively. I'd like to say.
First of all, I'd just like to acknowledge the invitation of my sister to talk about Indigenous knowledge as a topic or a subject and trying to define what that is. And from the discussions from the women here, we have all defined it to what it is for us. And in that defining Indigenous knowledge, we find that in most cases is very applicable. My father had talked about many a times when we were growing up, being a product of residential school, found that it was almost beaten into him, when are you going to learn? And that was around the language, around ceremony, coming to line with what the expectation of the colonizers are, whether that's residential school or through religion. My father was able to capture that and ask us as his sons and daughters, what did you learn? And he wouldn't ask us in a way that we had to define really quickly, but he allowed us to experience whatever the current issue was for the day. And in that whole process, when we were able to make the statement of what we learned, then we dialogue that. And we dialogue it to the point where, how did that feel? How did you come to that? And with my family, we've all been influenced by a lot of what the settlers, as a new terminology, brought to us. So that learning, when you talk about Indigenous knowledge, and what we've learned is so much enmeshed now. So how do we extract from that purity and innocence of our culture and still maintain what we've learned to help our next generation, so that there is a balance because we find in our experiences in doing workshops and doing presentations, a lot of it there's an imbalance because they're trying to define for themselves what is Indigenous knowledge. They want a definition so that they can say that we learned something. But if we were sitting in that same room with a bunch of academic people, they would probably walk away more confused than when they came, because I can understand where you come from and your knowledge and what you're talking about, what Myrna has been talking about, and what Liz has talked about many times. So it's almost, you have to, as Joe said in the song, you have to walk around my shoes. How do we engage the institutions in that dialogue and have them feel that from the heart? You know, through medicine wheel teachings, it's going back to those basics of medicine wheel teachings for who we are as an individual and how that interacts and how that's all put together. And then when a statement is said, or when a ceremony is witnessed and experienced, where does that touch you? Does it touch you in that heart? You go to power, does it touch you in your physical being? Does that make you want to dance? And when we have ceremony, are you totally within spirit? So for a lot of Indigenous knowledge keepers, we're able to do that, I believe. When we're in ceremony that it is praying to Kajamnado, then we can move there and be there. And we can feel that energy as move through our physical being. And if we get emotional, we know how to deal with that. We know where it's coming from, that energy. So there's a lot of things when you talk Indigenous knowledge that the difficulty I have with that is, what's the objective of the institutions? What's the objectives of the learners? So until we dialogue that in a circle and use that feather for that honesty part, when we hold that, we are supposed to speak the truth. And then when we speak that truth, then we now a lot of times we use flip chart and we put that down and people can start to really visualize that and see it. Where that kind of knowledge and insight came, as you mentioned earlier, is in our blood memory. My family grew up in Detroit, moved back to the community, and I believe that we've all been very successful in what we've been doing. And most of my brothers and my sisters have served their community in different capacities that can be looked at as they're all knowledge keepers. They're Indigenous knowledge keepers or Aboriginal knowledge keepers. Liz and I were having a dialogue like, what is our Anishinaabe Moen? What is our word for that? What does that mean when we come to that definition? And these are some of the things that we want to make sure that our next generation understands the value in Indigenous knowledge. And once they experience that and begin to learn that and use it and utilize it, that's the other thing, is utilizing it. And it could be as simple as understanding what those three words are. That, in a way, is a connection with our spiritual, our Creator, and that's a prayer. And then when you expand on that, it begins to have our people understand, because they feel ashamed to use the language. They feel ashamed to get into that idea of praying. And it's everybody's right. It's our right as human beings, no matter which corner of the earth you come from or which color on the medicine wheel you are, it's our right. And we have to get our young people to believe that they do have those rights, not just in these institutions, but outside this. They have the rights to take their in our way of looking at Sama and taking it down. My question this morning is, where do I put my Sama down? At home, I got a little tree stump I can't. I looked out here, there's all concrete. So do I do that? Yes, I can do that, because there's still a living thing out there. There's still a tree out there. I can do that. And there's still that connection to Creator. So we have to somehow be able to take our indigenous knowledge and help them transpose that. If you do a naming ceremony, how's that name going to carry you through, and how's it going to give you purpose, and what is your purpose? As Myrna had mentioned earlier about our Creator has that book, and He knows our life journey, and He'll open that page and He'll change our life journey if we're strongly in connection with that energy. And if we can keep that energy focused and balanced, then we can hear that. We can hear that in the wind, and we can hear that in the water, and we can feel that in the water. The idea of looking at how important it is to offer our Sama to that water then become apparent to my father had told me, what do you do in the morning? I get up and smudge, say my prayers. He said, how about when you're by the water? And I found my special place is whenever I'm up in Kettle Point, there's a place I go and put my Sama down in the water and pray for the water. And he said, did you ever think about when you touch that water, that the molecule in that water that you're touching is connected with the rest of the water in the world? So your power of touch is that powerful. So he didn't have to ask me, what did you learn? By his statement, he helped me learn that. And that's what indigenous knowledge starts to happen, is once we hear these things, we start to carry them on and start to believe that again. Again, there's so much about the fires, the 7 fires, where we're at right now. And there's a lot being said about where we want to go. And it's time that people of all cultures come together and take all their knowledge keepers with us, and we sit together and do that. And then I think we'll be all right. If not, it's a lesson that only the Creator can do, and to cleanse. And once the earth is cleansed, then we start over again. It's a hard lesson learned. So it goes back to the statement, what are we learning today? What did you learn today? And what is our responsibility? So I thank you for the opportunity. I feel very honored to be in this group discussing this, because in my community it's pretty hard to sit sometimes with your own people, because they see who you were. They don't see me for today, and they don't have the vision of what we could be tomorrow as a community. Like these little people who come to the ceremonies. It's amazing. I saw it. My grandson, whenever I go to the house, he's got a smudge. Biggest smudge you ever did see. It's like the smoke detector's going beep, 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 beep. It's like, and he offers it up. And where that teaching came from, or how he had that courage and that direction to go and do that, is something that we got to nourish in our young people, the next generation.
I like what you said. That's really, really true, eh? When you said, what are the objectives of the students who come through these institutions? So if I'm here, if my objective or my mission is to just get a course credit, then I really don't need to have the connection to the water, or feel the water, or even feel anything inside of my being. You can just give me information. And as long as I can have the information, then I have one level of understanding, and that seems to be enough for institutions, right? If you have the information and you know about it, but we don't really expect you to live this way or to make the connections through the heart to the water that touches all other waters on the planet. You really don't have to know that or feel that. And even if there were non-native students or students, multicultural students who wanted to know that feeling connection, then they would probably be afraid to feel things because they're not necessarily brought up to trust their feelings or even open the heart because they're afraid of feelings, because they're afraid of being hurt. And that's why what Myrna's saying is so important, because they got to heal. People have to heal. And we have to heal in order to reconnect to that water and feel the water and feel the land and know that we can have that energetic, that's the connection, what we call spiritual connection. It's a connection to the energy, but it's a feeling kind of energy, right? So I don't know if institutions are set up to really support Indigenous knowledge teaching sometimes, because we're asking them to open your heart and feel. We're asking you to deal with emotions, and if you come from a culture, a society that privileged your mind and in thinking reason and rationale was more important than what your feelings were about, then we run up against what they say, between a rock and a hard place. because here we want to teach feelings and we want to teach connections and we want to teach how, and they're saying, no, just give us the information. As long as I have the information and I know about it, that should be good enough for Indigenous knowledge. And I think that's where the conflict comes in, in the understanding between what goes on in institutions versus what goes on in the community. Because I think all of us come from community, even though I've spent a lot of time in institution myself, being educated by them. But that was one of the things I had to unlearn. I had to unlearn that it wasn't just my head knowledge that was important, that it was also what my heart knew and what my people knew, and where the community knowledge gets transferred to, coming through our families. So I don't think Western students necessarily bring their family knowledge to the table or to the classroom. So that's just what I took off of what you said. Yeah, it was good. Yeah, you did say that. That's great.
It's the same thing that the students face. The Indigenous students, as they come into institutions, they get in conflict and they don't understand it. And they don't have the grounding, because we haven't helped them stay grounded. And it's the grounding of those students that will carry them through. Because the institutions teach you a way to think. It doesn't teach you about, like we said, the heart, or how our people used to think, or how our people used to connect. And it's a struggle. It can drive you crazy.